Hello, I'm Professor Martin Harry. It gives me a huge pleasure to welcome Tansy Davies, both to our live audience here and to the speaks, people who have tuned in. Tansy really is one of the greatest living composers of her generation, just absolutely confirmed by the recent Ivor Novello Outstanding Works Award. You've taught at the Royal Academy of Music, Royal Holloway, and also the Eastman School in Indiana. And your work's being played really across continental Europe and Britain, and it's going to be very exciting to hear your lecture today, where you're talking about a number of your recent pieces. Having worked with our students over the last couple of days on a program that will start at 7:30. Tansy Davies, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I love the fact that Martin chose, or Martin and John perhaps chose some very ambitious pieces of mine. I think I do love a bit of ambition, but so it's a little bit seat of the pants, as we might say, but it's going to be an exciting concert. So yeah, what shall I talk about? In a world which is increasingly becoming dominated by thoughts of AI and the future and how our lives are going to be changing quite rapidly, I'm actually drawn back in time, and I'm increasingly fascinated by the idea of trying to remember roots, human roots. Who are we? Where did we come from? And indeed, in a kind of seat of knowledge here, in such a place, where all this great thinking stems back a couple of thousand years and then way beyond that, I'm kind of fascinated to know how music can fit into all that and how my music today fits into all that or not. So I wanted to talk a bit about codes and symbols, because it strikes me that this strange, rather ancient art of composing with music notation is potentially something that can connect us way back in time to other kind of symbolic writings, like hieroglyphic writing, for example. So the idea of notation as a code that could be seen as belonging to a kind of earlier version of human, because there are so many dimensions of reading into notation. It's a kind of abstract language. And could that somehow help us to rediscover lost pieces of human potential? So I have a slightly problematic relationship with notation. I think probably anyone that uses it does, because it's a strange tool. But what's wonderful about it these days, though, is that every composer creates their own. It's almost like their own signature of style of writing down their own music, because they have to. I think that's rather beautiful. But, it's not an everyday language. It's a kind of elevated mode of communication with a more intense function than ordinary communication, normally preserved for special places, sacred spaces, maybe. And I like the fact that these kind of modalities, like symbols, hieroglyphic writing, can sort of be read and interpreted in different ways. And I like to think that they can trigger a kind of expansion of the thought process. So it can be read as a sound, or a figurative graphic can have wider conceptual implications. But more importantly, I'm fascinated by the way that the human imagination can transmute these codes and symbols into other things, and you sort of have a little moments of epiphany when one thing gives way to another, and how that experience can actually be pushed through music. So when composers create scores, particularly sort of complex contemporary scores, I sort of imagine them creating invisible spatial constructions. And then when the musicians realize that music, they sort of pull the constructions into a vibrational field, a sort of measurable vibrational field. But the origins of that are a sort of transcendental dreaming. So I like the idea that we're working with something that's potentially a portal to sort of re-engaging with a magical side of ourselves. Yeah, sort of back into magical thinking, which is not something that's, you know, generally thought of as an everyday part of life, although it is part of my life, thankfully. So has that become lost, that access point, and can things like notation take us back through a kind of opening up of areas in the mind to magical thinking? Yeah, so something I do all the time is start from a combination of quite different ideas. Often I'll embed names and dates of people as sort of coded information into a score. Little secrets. And quite often I'll combine that with a visual impression I have about a musical space or environment that I want to create. And then sort of transmute that into a purely musical idea. So I'm going to go back a few years to a piece I wrote in 2020. It's a piece for string quartet called Nightingale's Ultra Deep Field. And there are sort of three streams of dreaming or information that went into this. As I mentioned, the coded numerological names and birth dates of performers, yeah, and they are put through kind of numerology as well, sort of grids. I made the rhythm patterns and pitch systems based entirely on the names and birth dates of each member of the Arditi Quartet. Second thing that found its way into this piece were the Hubble telescope's deep field images, which effectively allow us to sort of view time as it sort of moves forward towards us, from the beginnings of the universe, sort of lateral view of time. And the other thing that found its way into this was birdsong. I was in the countryside, in the Kent countryside, working on this piece, and I was very blessed by their little. I think I had assistants. It felt like these. I think they're called nightingale thrush. They're not the nightingale that you might remember the song of clearly, but it's a different kind of nightingale thrush, and they sing during the day, any time of night actually. It felt like they were singing all day and night to me. And once I started tuning into this bird song, I felt a kind of connection to the landscape, the land, and I'm very interested in trying to engage with nature anyway, all the time through my music, but it felt like they were coming at me, as it were, from all four directions. So that felt kind of shamanic, where you sort of know your place on the earth, and you kind of, that's sort of a grounding type of exercise. But it also was a really nice way to relate to the idea of a quartet. So listening through and into layers of birdsong brought to mind the Hubble images. And yeah, I was just trying to sort of bring these things together, the sort of telescopic and lateral perspectives, the merging of deep time and of song. So it's again going back to this idea of trying to remember who we are, who are humans. So I'm going to play the first movement of Nightingale's Ultra Deep Field, and we're going to have a look at the score as well. There's often a sort of sense of longing, I think, in my music, which is underpinned by a very physical, demanding kind of questing and questioning nature about the music. So that's quite a good example of those two parameters as well in the mix. It's very physical music and quite demanding, especially on the students today. So complex new music, I think it can be compared to the mysterious achievements and ambitions of antiquity, with its balance of the scientific, the spiritual, the visionary, sort of, and engineering aspects too. Another very important area of my life, which I don't speak about very much, is that I practice the ancient art of Reiki healing. And within Reiki, we use a lot of symbols. And these symbols have to be imagined and literally drawn with the hands into the air or onto the body or onto anything really. And once the symbol is drawn, it becomes activated for use. And these symbols are rather like invisible holograms. And like the modality of Reiki healing, or even the kind of enigmatic mystery schools from ancient Egypt, this way of being guided inward via symbolic images can open up each of us to the vastness, I think, of our own sort of the fields of our own imagination, as it were, so that we can really, truly embrace our creativity. And I'm someone that likes to sort of create bridges and threads between different styles, different sounds, different genres. Very different things. I like finding ways for me to be which you wouldn't have maybe imagined. So an important part of my work is that I sometimes like to join together my composing practice with the Reiki healing. This idea that anyone that comes into contact with my music, in that case, will also be touched by the energy of Reiki. So I hope that doesn't freak you out. Working in this way, I can direct the healing energy through me into the sounds that I write down in the form of notation. The notation allows for the energy to be redirected like a stream through each musician, who in turn, via their own unique musical signature and their intelligence, their unique sort of energy field, as it were, sends this Reiki-infused musical information out into the audience. That's how I like to imagine it. This is a key chain of transmuted information, which also changes and gathers information as it furthers its way sort of downstream, ultimately flowing into a sort of collective consciousness, sort of, let's call it, ocean of human thought, when it reaches the audience, who then maybe take the energy with them out into their lives. So, just to reiterate, a musical idea that for me usually begins with an imaginary space, texture, feeling or color, which is combined with Reiki-infused energy, which is transmuted into the symbolic language of notation, which is transmuted into sound, which is transmuted into the collective experience of live music making. And hopefully that has effects on well-being, but more importantly, I'm interested in how this chain of events of sort of little transmutations can just open up things in the mind, based on the idea of expanding creative potential. That's what I would love my music to be able to do in the world. So I'm going to play a bit of a piece now, which is much more explicit than others in its use of the my Reiki practice. A piece that was premiered in April this year. It's called Canopies of Liquid Light. And there's a passage about 3/4 of the way through where there's a voice excerpt which I created myself. So we're going to hear that now. A little bit of Canopies of Liquid Light.
Evolution is managed by a carefully constructed timeline, but rather and is not random itself out of time. Many of you may have certain periods. The rate at which evolution occurs within a species during these precise moments during the history of the universe. This is evolution and approaching the core are inexplicably entwined.
So we can go straight into that. So just before we play that, which is the opening of the same piece, just want to talk about the sort of multidimensionality which I'm trying to get at. You can listen to the music from different perspectives, rather like a hologram or a sort of complex crystalline form. It can be appreciated in a myriad of ways, hopefully. Music also manipulates time, as we know. In that sense, it can take listeners outside of the construct of time that governs our lives. So hopefully finding a way to create inner space for imagining. One thing I've done for years and years and years is layer different tempi. So there's different times going on at the same time. Using canons and isorhythmic patterns, so cycles of pitches and rhythms which are uneven, highlighting different moments of a line as it goes round and round. And I often use extremes of tempi and sometimes going down the whole scale, as it were, from a fast version, a little bit faster, a little bit slower, a little bit slower, a little bit slower, a little bit slower, and then there's a super slow version at the end of it all. But sometimes I try and set them all off at once. But anyway, there's layering going on all over the place. So I'm going to play the beginning of that piece, which is Canopies of Liquid Light again, because I thought it'd be fun to hear something colourful and joyful, because I've played some quite moody things. So let's hear a bit of the opening. If we can have a look at the score of that one. There's vibraphones, 2 vibraphones doing something, 1 in 7 and 1 in 8, I think. But they basically got the same material. And then there's a very slow moving thing going on in the bass, sort of almost like a Baroque, very slow music for the gods. And then some very fast music at the top, faster rhythms there in the piano. It's just an idea of how this kind of strata of my music is built up. And in terms of the sort of vertical nature of this piece, it's very clear there are just 2 paragraphs that keep alternating. One is the one that's governed by these 2 vibraphones going round and round, and the pitches, they have a sort of basically a chord which changes every time. And then it's interrupted by a set of chorales in the woodwind. And behind the woodwind is a kind of melting idea of 2 pianos, which is just typical of me to sort of have something which is in the foreground. If you took it out, it would sound quite clear, but I like to mess it up with something, as I say, in this case, and put more of a melting quality. So it's sort of giving a different dimension. So it's this idea again of looking through laterally through time and space, and there's something mysterious hiding behind. I love that kind of mystery. So we'll play a little bit of the opening, Canopies of Liquid Light. sort of, I think of it as a very colourful piece. It's almost like a firework display. So I thought it might have something cheerful in the middle. So going back to the idea of audio-visualness, I think my most kind of holographic piece is another work for strings, actually. It's called Monolith, I Extend My Arms. I'll read a bit of the program note. A rock-like strata of cannons, Monolith, I Extend My Arms, came to me as a vision of layered cyclical material for a large body of strings. Simultaneously dense and translucent, I saw the sound as a cloud-shaped body of rock descending gently and very slowly, like an enormous feather from the sky to earth. The exterior, sometimes vast and granite-like, with quartz sparkles, sometimes opaque and web-like, drifting and coalescing, is highlighted and accentuated by percussion, bells and bass drum. Internal rhythms gradually work their way out from deep within, finally bubbling up and dancing across the rock surface. So we have a photograph. This is from 1930, photographed by Claude Cahun. It's called I Extend My Arms. It sort of perfectly fits the essence of my own work, monolithic but open and or protective. The ancient rock in Cahun's photograph evokes the catonic, earthy, essential, primal, non-gendered self that Cahun's many self-portrait images express. And they say masculine, feminine. It depends on the situation. Neuter is the only gender that always suits me. So I'd like to play a little bit from the opening of Monolith, I Extend My Arms. that's actually primarily, I think there's two players per part, so it's a very scary piece for an orchestra to play, especially a symphony orchestra who normally play with many more than that. Anyway, I just want to talk about my teacher, Simon Bainbridge, because he was the most amazing composer, and one of the last times I heard his music live actually was here. And I think a lot of the sort of translucency and the timbral delicacy that I find myself doing has sort of come down through his legacy of his ear, actually. So I want to just talk about the end of this piece, Monolith I Extend My Arms, where I wrote this as a sort of tribute to Simon. And I like to think of it as being particularly holographic. What I did is I created a coded version in music of his name, and I created a chord out of that. And you hear the chord a number of times, and it gets orchestrated, spelled in different ways every time. It sort of rises higher and higher. And he was very tall, so I like this as a kind of idea of his spectre rising as he went off after this life into the next, and almost a kind of holographic Halloween image for us all today. So I'll play the end of Monolith I Extend My Arms, which is a tribute to Simon Bainbridge. So there is a very kind of earthy, physical, ritualistic, very strong side of that in my music, and interested in these sort of metaphysical pagan ideas. It can be hard to reconcile a place for this kind of complex music that I've dedicated myself to, my life to making. But I would argue that this kind of thinking that goes into creating a complex and abstract musical construct somehow presents an aspect of humanity that has been largely overlooked for thousands of years. and that aspect presents precisely what is missing from modern Western society. In our drive towards the logical, the technological advancements, we sort of find ourselves in a permanent state of rationality, no magic, and existing, as most of us do, at an extreme level of that state of mind, which I think has meant that human behavior has become rather arrogant, rather dismissive. So what might have become lost as a result of this intense focus on the logical? Could it be that we've become such specialists in this active mode of thinking and intellectualizing that we've lost the ability to enter other necessary states of being? I think that psychedelic thinkers have always been important in human societies. And I think our collective growth as individuals and collective growth by individuals and as a species is underpinned by prophecies and myths that have circled us down the ages, helping us to find meaning for ourselves within the sort of panorama of the cosmos. You only have to look at ancient sort of religious iconography and look at halos and flames to just imagine that early humans had a wider range of perception, perhaps, than we do now. So perhaps life was more vivid then. Maybe it was commonplace to be able to see or sense lights and colours glowing around special individuals, or so that maybe that has been lost. But I think art, music can help us sort of retune into that. And I think AI is sort of helping us into that too. So I'm looking way back and to the future. But this idea of becoming other, which is, I've mentioned a couple of times, shamanic practice, thought transmutation, is a bit like working through the depths of the imagination to reach another, the mind of another. And you might have heard the term shape-shifting, which I think is exactly that. It's where through a ritualistic process you're able to enter the sort of being of something else. I would describe it as a kind of extreme act of empathy. So again, going back in time, I became very interested in cave paintings. They show us symbols, they show us animals. We don't know exactly why. But if they were painted just as a show of hunting skills, without any language, I imagine that these skills would involve developing this kind of shamanic ability to kind of become the prey, to develop a deep knowing about what the animal might think, behave, to know how it might behave in a certain situation. And that depth of understanding, that act of thinking or dreaming to the point of becoming, that sort of fascinates me as a human potential that we don't really realize today. So I think that listening to complex music, which is abstract, can help retrain our ability to perceive in a multidimensional way, which could open up possibilities for understanding and empathy. It's like a reconnecting of wires that could be put to practical use in society. So I created an opera called Cave, which is about exactly this kind of scenario where a father is searching for a lost daughter, and he feels that the only way to connect with her is to go into a cave and spend time with cave paintings that she used to like as a child. And there's in the opera, the cave paintings become a kind of portal for a way to connect the two souls. So I'd like to show a little bit of the opera. In this particular moment is maybe 1/3 of the way through the the man is basically trying to sort of invoke some presence or some feeling for his daughter, and ends up being a strange dialogue between him, the cave painting, and the daughter. So it's a kind of transmutation again of communication, and what might the paintings mean, what's coming through them. And he sort of calls her in, and she's a half human character. And so they managed to communicate across different realms, as it were. So let's hear a bit of that one, and we can see it too. So we've got Mark Padmore and Elaine Mitchener.
Shadow sticks the cartoon. When the light in grief, skin and my child is lost, don't leave me undone. Brink of augury in the relentless rain, nil by mouth or quad squad. Stab in the dark, and my child is lost. Don't leave me down by the faulty dark sea crowd. Shadow shift, coins on tongues under infrared sun. Phosphorus moon, the birds arise. Modems screaming interference. Manifest of storm warning, the alarm. Bell rings backwards and no ferry. Lights its soul. Comes and my child is lost. Don't. Leave me, arrest me. Don't leave me. Howling in my sleep and demands my heart. I'm thought to be close. It's soul. Black wings.
Thank you. So I think that's about it for now. I think it's sort of quite suitable to leave you with a black crow on Halloween. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I don't know if this, yes, you can hear me, for a really stimulating lecture, incredible orchestration with this sort of sense. I think very clearly you can hear the difference between the clarity and also this misty sort of orchestration. When did this first enter into your work, this particular?
I think there's always been layers. In fact, it was a bit more dense when I first started. I think because I sort of grew up listening more to pop music than other things. I had the feeling that you could kind of write lots of rhythmical, intricate things, and they would sound clear, because that's what you hear on pop recordings because of the production and so on. But of course, that's not really possible when you write for an orchestra, and it gets very muddy. So I had to sort of fight my way out of the thicket of that, but I brought some of it with me, because I quite like a bit of chaos and the clarity. Yeah.
And the other fascinating thing, I had this transmutation idea, where you're drawing on shamanic and Reiki rituals. There's a lot of theory surrounding Reiki, and I mean, is that something that you would say you've internalized and represent actually in your music in some way?
Well, I am a Reiki master, so I do know all the theory, but I think you have to internalize it, really. I mean, I don't practice professionally, so if I was doing that, I think it would be more sort of at the top of my mind, front of my mind, the theory. But like music, I mean, the more you embody it, I think the more authentic it can be.
Now, we're just about to approach the point where we will break for a concert, but are there any questions from the audience? Yes, thank you.
I think my question is actually about the last piece, the operatic one. And this might be because of the theatrical elements as well, but I thought that especially when the main singer wasn't singing, there were other voices that, at least to me, sounded somewhat a sonic symbolism for the paintings, and that got me thinking that, especially compared to the prior pieces, where I think that it sounded to me they were more abstract, at least in terms of symbolism. How important do you think it is to you that there is musical symbolism? And again, this might be because of the theatrical elements and that it's visual. But yeah, essentially that's the question.
Yeah, it's important to me that there's a hinterland to the music. I do have a lot of kind of technical proficiency. I can make good notes and good rhythms, but for me they're meaningless until I find a reason for them being. And for me, it's often this idea about them carrying something powerful, which is of use to me and others, hopefully.
Thank you. I do have one more question, is that all right? Very early on, you mentioned notation. And so I'm from Iran, and music in Iran is still quite improvisational. And there are various reasons for it. I assume choir wasn't a thing in the religion, and perhaps it didn't become polyphonic. But how do you think that current, or at least Western staff notation, is a limitation when it comes to improvisation? And how can that be improved? Because as you mentioned, modern composers are doing their own version of notation, but is Western style notation perhaps holding improvisation back, or how that could be overcome?
I think it's an interface, and you just have to tweak it and make it work for you. And if you get improvising musicians that are working with notation, or composers that are coming to them with notated scores, yeah, it's a real problem. But I think it's a fascinating challenge for us. It would be a lot of work to sort of reinvent the wheel. But as I said, we do have to, each of us, create our own versions of that. But I like the idea that rather than see it just as a kind of boring means of communication, if we can see it as carrying something more than that, I think it's a bit more enticing, a thing to work with.
Thank you.
Just time for one more question. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for a fascinating talk. You mentioned something early on that I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, and maybe you don't either, but that you mix genres, or you draw upon genres. Could you talk a bit more exactly how? Is that you're thinking sort of fusion, or you're fusing genres, or you're importing them? And if so, which ones, and even perhaps why?
I think those sorts of collisions just have happened naturally in my music, because I grew up playing and listening to various different kinds of music. I played electric guitar, and I sung in funk bands, and I was also playing in orchestras, and I became a professional horn player in symphony orchestras for about 3 years. So those things became amazing things to have done as a composer. But because I've always listened to such a wide range of things, I'm interested in this. One of the main problems going back to notation is it's very hard to get a kind of attitude into the music, because one of the problems with modern life is that there's not time to rehearse enough a new score, so it can sound a bit boring, a bit bland, a bit lacking in character. And one of the focuses on my music, I suppose, has been rhythm, and that's something which has kind of been left out, as far as I'm concerned, of classical music for a long time. There's not really much rhythm going on there. So I've imported that from other genres and tried to make it work. And it means that my music's really hard to play, but somehow I think I've found a way of doing it that manages to get people in the mood to do it. And I don't know how. And but yeah, I guess I've imported rhythm and attitude from other genres like funk, pop, an earthiness maybe from folk music, from world music. But it's more about the feeling your way into it and the textures, the performance practice, than actual melodies as such.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you very much indeed for this talk. Very much looking forward to hearing your pieces, and we will have a chance to talk a little bit more during the concert tonight. So thank you very much indeed, Tansy.
Thank you.